hello and welcome world history students to World War II 101. This is Mr. Ryan. If you don't know me, hello. If you do, welcome back. We're going to talk about World War II here as fast as possible. I'm going to try to cover all the big points. If you're a fan of World War II, I apologize because I'm going to skip so much important information here. But in the interest of your time, we're going to try to cover the main things here. If you need to pause at any point, taking notes here, getting the main ideas, feel free to do so. This is why this is a video. But keep in mind here that this information is going to be essential for you to understand this event. I'll try to keep this as concise as possible. I said 10 to 15 minutes. The nerd inside of me died a little bit when they heard that, but I'll make it happen. All right, so if we remember where we left off before we started this insane COVID, like 4 months summer vacation, totalitarian aggression, right? The rise of the dictators. These are four people, not nice people, did a lot of bad stuff, and they had bad intentions. Japan under Tojo and the emperor, very hyper-militaristic. They wanted more resources. It's a small island with a lot of people on it, so they decided to invade China circa 37. Mussolini in Italy, also totalitarian fascists. They invade Ethiopia. They're trying to flex on the world a little bit. 1935, they form this alliance with Germany, eventually becomes known as the Axis, and they add one more person. Hitler's Nazi Germany, also totalitarian. They start to annex countries all over Europe and then eventually decide to invade Poland in 1939. And then finally, Stalin's totalitarian Soviet Union, a little less aggressive expansion-wise because they're so huge already. However, they have a secret agreement with Hitler where they're not going to attack each other because they're both bad people and they want to be bad in their own areas, but they're going to take the other half of Poland when the Nazis invade in 39. So keep this totalitarian aggression in mind when you try to understand what led to the biggest war that has ever happened on this planet. All right, the two sides here, the Axis versus the Allies. Again, the Axis, Germany and Italy, and then eventually Japan form this three-pronged head of evil, all right? And they're just some bad people there. On the other side, the Allies, France, America, Britain, and then the Soviet Union. What are they doing over there? I thought they were friends with Germany. We'll get to that in a second here. So World War II, we're going to look at in three different areas, starting with Western Europe here. Again, once more, I apologize for how much I'm skipping with this. This is just an overall kind of introduction overview to get you familiar with some important things. So the Nazis had this very effective army, unfortunately, and they used a tactic called blitzkrieg to wipe out early resistance. This is basically where they would send in armor, vehicles, planes move so fast that before you know it hit you, they were already on you, behind you, destroying important infrastructure, so you couldn't coordinate a response, and then like that, before you know it, you've already lost to the Germans before you could even get ready for what was happening. They take over huge parts of Europe doing that. Britain, across the English Channel, they had a little bit of water to protect them. They are being bombed left and right like crazy, right? If we take a look at the numbers here I have created, they correspond to certain points. So number one deals with number one. Thanks for my pretty drawing there, right? Number two. And so the Nazis are blitzing, as we call the Blitzkrieg, London, and bombing it day after day after day, and they barely defeat the Nazi attack. So Britain is barely hanging on. The rest of Europe has been taken over. It is an ugly picture. Well, three, America joins the Allies in late 1941, and we'll get to why in a second. And they start actually by taking back northern Africa. The Nazis had taken over so much area in Europe, they actually also bled into North Africa to control that entire Mediterranean area. With the British, we push them back slowly and surely, and then we start to move into Italy. Italy talked a big game, but they were actually pretty pathetic. They were weak, all right? And so the Nazis were actually occupying Italy as well as other areas to keep Italy on the Axis powers. So we're pushing up through there, but we have a big problem with number four here. France, one of our allies, had been taken over by, that's a terrible circle, I apologize, had been taken over by the Nazis from early on. We had to save France from the Nazis so they could help us in the fight against Germany. We launched this attack called D-Day. If you played the Call of Duty World War II game, that is the first level, I believe. Seen Saving Private Ryan. That's this opening. Largest amphibious invasion ever, and we slowly take back France from Nazi control. After another year or so of this brutal fighting, we're pushing the Nazis back and back and back through France. We save France, and even though the French military really struggled against the Nazis early on against the Blitzkrieg, there were a lot of local French people who hated the Nazis and were resisting before we got there and helped us to push them out. So they did a great job helping us there as well. Eastern Europe. This one is one of my favorite ones that is not talked about nearly enough. So at first, if you remember, we said, okay, the totalitarian dictators, they're not good people, and Stalin and Hitler have this secret agreement to not fight each other so they can both take half and half of Poland, right? Well, Hitler was crazy, like literally he was insane. He was not a stable person. And he decided for some strange reason to go back against this agreement and attack Russia. Worst idea he had, for military tactics, because Russia's huge. All right, and if we look at number two here, they dominate early on, but Russia's huge. It is 11 time zones across, and so they were encircling parts of the Red Army. They were killing, capturing, doing all these things, but each time other parts of the Red Army could just fall back and retreat, and the Nazis get sucked further and further into Russia. Russia is so huge, you could have the best army on the planet, and it would take you decades to take the entire country. It's trouble, all right? And so Hitler, with all this progress, gets confident, and they're about to take Moscow, the capital of the Soviet Union. But again, not a smart guy. All of his generals are like, yep, let's do it. We're going to win. It's going to be easy. And he's like, no, let's go south instead. And they're like, are you crazy? But they're scared of him. He's going to have them killed if they disagree. So they go south. They change direction. Again, Hitler, not military qualified for leadership, not a stable person, and he really gets themselves from a position where they should have beaten the Russians to where they lose to the Russians. The German army was not prepared for long, drawn-out fighting. They were just going to be in and out in a couple months. They didn't even send winter gear with their soldiers because they assumed they were going to win. Never invade Russia, especially don't invade Russia in winter. The winter is so harsh. You have -40, -50 degrees. It's very hard fighting. And this Nazi war machine that kicked butt all over Europe is getting bogged down, not even because the Soviets were that good at fighting, but because Russia itself is so hard to conquer. But finally here, the Battle of Stalingrad, this is where the Nazi war machine was finally destroyed. America played an important role, but the Soviets did the real heavy lifting here. There were 2 million, yes, you read that right, 2 million people who were either killed or wounded in this multi-year battle over a city called Stalingrad. Yes, after Stalin. That's how cool he thought he was. He wanted a city named after him. After years and years, this is awful. It's two totalitarian regimes fighting each other. The Nazis said, hey, if you retreat, we'll kill you. But then the Soviets also said, hey, if you retreat, we'll kill you. So it's this awful situation. They're stuck in this meat grinder. And the Soviets win. They break the back of this Nazi war machine that had taken over so much, and they slowly push back. So finally, we have Western and Eastern Europe combines. US and Soviet soldiers meet and take Germany out once and for all. World War II in the Pacific, totally different animal here. Japan, again, another totalitarian bad guy, they need even more resources than what they can get in China. They're having trouble. They're killing a lot of Chinese people, but it's tough. They're getting some resistance. They decide to do a huge gamble. And they attack allied territories, again, British colonies, French colonies, American colonies in the Pacific, including the US and Hawaii. I'm sure you've heard of Pearl Harbor before. The Japanese launched a sneak attack on the naval base that we had in Hawaii, hoping to hit us so hard that we would be scared of joining or something like that. Again, doesn't make sense. And this is a gamble that they had such a low percentage of winning that historians are confused why they even did it. But America didn't just back down. We lost about 2,000, 3,000 people. during Pearl Harbor, huge portions of our Pacific fleet were destroyed, but we're America. We're not messing around, and if you poke the bear, we will hit you hard. So it took us about a year, but we really built ourselves back up. We were pumping out warships left and right in factories. One day the factory was producing cars, the next day the factory was producing ships, right? And so we begin this strategy known as island hopping with number 3 here. We're jumping from one island to another in the Pacific because the Japanese had spread out all over the place. The Pacific is huge, right? There's tens of thousands of islands there. They were occupying lots of them. So we had to go from island to island in this slow grind. We would invade, and again, here we see Iwo Jima. This is number 3 right here. They're on the beach. They're getting shelled. These are U.S. Marines who are pushing in hard. This is brutal fighting. The Japanese had this warrior culture kind of taken from the samurai where they would never surrender, and it was more shameful to give up in battle than it was to die. And in fact, they thought it was more good for your family and honorable to die in battle. And so as we're island hopping, we're losing troops. It's definitely deadly, but we are starting to dominate the Japanese. We're taking islands after islands. And so fourth here, the Japanese start to turn to this tactic called kamikaze pilots here and other suicidal methods. This plane is literally intentionally flying into this ship laden with explosives to try to take out our ship, right? Because we had guns on ships to shoot down the planes. They wouldn't really do much damage unless this pilot believed in Japan so heavily that they were going to take their own life to try to help the war effort. Fifth and finally here, we've been fighting in the Pacific for a couple years. We were getting closer and closer to mainland Japan, the island that is. We had this tough choice. The Japanese have been a brutal enemy. They believe so intently in dying for their country that we're actually afraid to invade Japan. Like literally, we are so concerned that maybe every Japanese citizen is going to charge our soldiers and rather die and take one of us with them than surrender. So this is a hard choice, but we've secretly developed a bomb called, obviously, the atomic bomb, right? Everyone in the world knew this technology existed. We were just racing to be the first to develop it. Luckily for us, American scientists were the first to successfully test an atomic bomb in the deserts of New Mexico. We decided, after looking at the prospects of invading Japan, that it was a better choice. I think it's not a good choice because it's ugly either way, but it was better for America to drop an atomic bomb on a Japanese city to try to force them to surrender than to potentially lose 1 million soldiers, which was the estimate, if we invaded mainland Japan. We dropped one bomb and they still didn't back down. It kills, 80,000 people, levels the city. We drop a second bomb, and at that point, the Japanese are realizing America is taking this to another level that we cannot even come close to matching. And so finally, the Japanese surrender in the Pacific. So the Allies have won. The Axis was destroyed. And again, really, it was just Germany and Japan that were the main bad guys. Italy was like a paper tiger. On paper, they look really scary, but in reality, they were made out of paper, so you could just crumple them up and knock them out easily. They were really bad at being a fascist power. So finally here, the war that was started by totalitarian greed and militarism is really finished by societies that were more committed to freedom and democracy, but at what cost, right? And keep in mind, the Allies were much more freedom-based, but like the Soviet Union, that's not a free group of people, right? Just keep that in mind. It's kind of a totalitarian versus democracy, but it's not that simple. But the deaths-wise, we have tens of millions of people lost here. Take a look at the numbers. The Soviet Union, they beat the Nazis and pushed them back, but at what cost? Tens of millions dead. In China, as they resisted the Japanese, tens of millions dead. Germany themselves almost lose 10 million troops. We have, the U.S., we did an important job here, but we were certainly not the only one to help fight back, right? So this is the story of World War II. I apologize for rushing through this. I'm just trying to save your time and tell a really concise, short picture. Go back, pause, rewatch if this helps, all right? We'll have other resources as well to try to really understand this conflict, what it meant, what it looked like, like really cool and fun to study in a lot of ways. But also just keep in mind, for all the video games that we've played about World War II, this was very real. The whole world was on the line. We're facing totalitarian domination versus free societies, or at least anti-totalitarian societies in some ways, that are trying to push back. And luckily, thank God, we were on the winning side, because if, Nazi Germany, the Japanese Empire were successful, we would not be here today, or at least not like this. So thanks for listening. This is Mr. Ryan signing off.